Popular culture. Pop culture. It's everywhere. It's our media. It's our movies. It's our books. It's our TV shows. It's our music. But what you might not know is that it's been around a lot longer than people think it is. And also, it affects our daily lives much more than you might expect. But first, let's even talk about how I got to the subject in the first place. So, over the summer, I was working my job, pushing carts at ye old Target, and I saw this guy walking around and he looks exactly like this. I kid you not, he looked exactly like he just walked straight out of the Matrix. And that got me thinking. That movie came out well over 20 years ago. That's kind of crazy that it's still relevant, so many years after it came out. And so, for my senior's capstone, I bring you the history of pop culture, how films and media affect society. Alright, so let's start with a definition, because that's always how these things sort of start. So, pop culture is defined by the Cambridge Dictionary as music, TV, movies, books, etc. that are popular and enjoyed by ordinary people rather than experts or very educated people. And that's a good definition, but it kind of comes off as a little rude. The whole very educated people part. It's like, hey, this ain't for dumb people, but I'm getting off track here. Dictionary.com has a better definition. It says cultural and commercial artifacts, media, and entertainment reflecting, suited to, or aimed at the tastes of the general masses of people. All right, so now that we have the definition out of the way, where did pop culture? Pop culture? Did I just say pop culture? Where did pop culture come from? Well, that's kind of a hard question to nail down because humanity, since as long as we've been around, has been telling stories since our monkey brains figured out we could talk. But the actual term pop culture has a much more solid answer for that. It was most likely used in 19th century Britain to refer to the entertainment that the quote unquote lower class of people would enjoy. Like stuff like street plays or like penny farthings, which were these little books that were only cost a penny and they just had like a bunch of little short stories in there. Stuff that didn't really cater to the richy rich of 19th century England. The popular part of pop culture came from the fact that there's always been way more poor people than there have been of rich people. And so it was just this form of media was more popular just because the general populace, more of them read it and it consumed it. However, pop culture didn't really gain any sort of legitimacy until, the early 1900s with the invention of the radio. That way, like radio plays and audio dramas and just music could be enjoyed by people all over the world, anyone who could tune into that frequency. And that kind of was a huge boom for pop culture. It exploded at that point. And then even more so with the invention and the mass production of films, that completely blew everything out of the water. But first, and I know you want to talk about films, that's why you're here. And we will. Oh, we will, I promise. But first I want to talk about pop culture from before, old pop culture. And I think we have to go back to a little guy named Billy Shakes. William Shakespeare. You might have heard of him. Shakespeare is probably the most famous writer of all time, but at the very least, the most famous playwright. Many words that we use in English today were invented by Shakespeare. Some of these are really fun, like alligator, bedroom, downstairs, hurry, puppy dog, and zany. And these, I can't tell you how many times I'm like, oh, that dude's so zany. I say that every day. So Shakespeare's plays were kind of the pop culture of their time. They're so widely referenced and read and seen, and in a weird way, they've kind of come back around. This has become a snake eating its own tail, as a lot of films and stories today are in themselves adaptations of Shakespeare's plays. Some examples of this are Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, which is an awesome movie, 10 Things I Hate About You, West Side Story is Romeo and Juliet. Heck, The Lion King is just Hamlet. The Lion King's just Hamlet with cats. Shakespeare's influence was so strong that it was the pop culture of his time, and it kind of continues to be today. It's very impressive. Another icon of early pop culture, although, later than Shakespeare, was Mary Shelley. If you don't know Mary Shelley, you definitely know what she did. She was the writer of Frankenstein. Some people credit her as one of the earliest writers of science fiction. At the very least, she did create the trope of the mad scientist. Victor Frankenstein is a mad scientist in every sense of the word. In fact, Frankenstein was the first ever horror movie to be filmed back in 1930. Mary Shelley is and always will be an icon. You should read Frankenstein. It's a pretty good book, guys. Alright, so now let's move on to talking about how pop culture influences our society today. Up first, and it might not be your most favorite topic, but I think it's interesting, it's fashion. Movies influence fashion in like a crazy way. If you see a cool character and he's like dressed in a cool way, that's, people are going to emulate that. And that's the reason I dress like this in my everyday life. An example of this is, back in the 80s, after Raiders of the Lost Ark was released, the sales of fedoras boomed like 300%. Which, fedoras have a bit of a different context these days. Milady. But that's still pretty cool. A more modern example of this is the James Bond franchise. MGM makes like crazy deals with all these companies so that James Bond is seen in their movie wearing like the newest Apple Watch or using an iPhone. In fact, this is so in depth that like when No Time to Die was coming out, but it got delayed because of COVID, like everything did back then, they had to reshoot scenes or like digitally replace the props Bond was using because they were outdated. They just needed to say so up to date. Another way that pop culture influences society is through food. If you go to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge or whatever the Harry Potter land is called, you're gonna eat some Star Wars food. You're gonna drink some butterbeer. I drank the blue milk and it tasted like Smarties, which was weird, but I still liked it. Going back to the James Bond example, in Casino Royale, both the book and the movie give explicit examples on how to make Bond's specific like cocktail drink. It's a vodka martini called the Vesper. Not really my thing, but you do you guys. This has led fans to like have parties where they drink the drinks or like, they can make like little Yoda cookies. Look how cute these are. And I know everyone wants a Turkish delight after seeing that first Narnia movie, but I've heard they're actually not very good, but it's still Edmund made it look quite tasty in that movie. All right, new topic, but we're still talking about how pop culture influences us. A huge example of this is like science and technology. Science fiction itself is like really predicted stuff that could actually happen. Or scientists have looked at things in the movies and have made them in real life. A great example of this is the shoes from Back to the Future 2. Nike made them in real life, and they are crazy expensive, which is too bad. That movie also predicted just a whole lot of stuff like video communication, like Skype or something, or Zoom. VR headsets. His son uses a headset in one scene. And we kind of have hoverboards. They're not as cool as they are in the movie, but people can still fall down on them and break their back. Star Trek also predicted this with like 3D printers and mobile telephones and stuff. A research company has developed a liquid metal robot exactly like the one shown in Terminator 2. This little guy works by melting and reforming itself, and it can basically take any shape that they want it to. One of the ideas for this robot was that it could be eaten by a subject and it could go into their stomach and like solidify around a foreign body and let it like get rid of that dangerous substance. All right, so that's an overview of pop culture's influence on language, food, fashion, and science. Well, let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, politics. Don't worry, we're not going to talk about it too long, just a little bit. People always get mad about their politics and their pop culture, but that's kind of a silly argument because art has always inherently had a message to spread behind it. In fact, a lot of filmmakers to this day are using their films to like spread awareness of different problems that are, plaguing our society. My guy Jordan Peele, literally all of his movies so far they've all dealt with race issues in the United States. People always say go woke, go broke, but clearly that is not a problem here. Now, are those messages getting more obvious? Yeah, probably. But honestly, in my opinion, that's probably because something needs to change and people aren't getting it. Alright, so we've briefly discussed all the influences pop culture has on our society today. But would you be surprised to know that there's certain people that are trying to push back against this influence? I'm not, but that's because people like to get mad. But these people, some of them do have a couple good points. One of the major problems that people have with pop culture today is like content for children. Which, yeah, of course, that makes sense. There's absolutely some stuff out there that kids should not see. But I think a lot of streaming services these days have actually done pretty well for this. Like most, if not all, streaming services have child protective locks on them to, like, kind of limit what they're going to be able to see on that platform. Honestly, Disney Plus has a really, like, pretty beefy one, and I'm pretty impressed with it. Alright, so now let's talk about the current state of pop culture. Now more than ever, there's just like a sheer amount of stuff out there. Everyone I know is watching like 3 different shows currently, and they're all behind on them, and it's kind of stressing them out a little bit. There's a lot of content out there. There are more movies coming out in like the last decade than there have been like ever. And there's a couple reasons for this. The first is that, with the advent of digital filmmaking, thanks Lucas, it's a lot cheaper and faster to make movies than it used to be when you had to lug around a big film camera, then you had to take it get developed. Digital, you just record it right onto the file, put it in your computer, and you can start editing right away. The other reason is that ever since in 1997, when James Cameron's Titanic came out and became the first ever movie to make $1 billion, movie studios realized that they could make kind of an absurd amount of money off of these things. In a weird way, though, this has kind of backfired on the film industry as there's just so much stuff out there trying to be the new big thing that, like, the littler, just funner films just kind of get lost in all the content. But then again, even that has kind of rubber banded back the other way, and there's studios like A24, which have kind of branded themselves on making like art house kind of like little indie films. Another way that the film industry has kind of changed since then is that we were kind of in a phase there where we were making superhero films like every day. Ever since Spider-Man in 2002 and Iron Man in 2008, like superhero movies, we finally got good ones. And they just kind of took off from there. And it's lasted like, 20 years at this point. It's only just now starting to slow down. And honestly, it's kind of worked out for everyone. Avengers Endgame is the second highest grossing movie of all time. And people are saying like Marvel is dead now, but like, are you kidding me? You think the next Avengers movie isn't going to make $1 billion? You're crazy. Get out of here. It seems like video game adaptations are the next big thing. We'll see how that goes. It's been pretty hit or miss so far. All right, so now we're going to talk about the future of pop culture and filmmaking. And we're going to start off with another big topic that everyone likes talking about so much. It's AI. Ooh, AI. AI has been kind of used for some like kind of cool things lately. In the new Obi-Wan Kenobi show, Darth Vader's voice is an AI trained off of James Earl Jones. And normally I'd be like completely against that sort of thing, but James Earl Jones specifically requested it because he thought his voice was like too weak for it. I don't know if that's true. I think James Earl Jones still has a few good performances left in him, but it is kind of cool that they were able to replicate Darth Vader's voice in a way that pretty much no one could tell that it wasn't James Earl Jones doing the voice. This same technology is like currently trying to be used for people who have been injured and can't speak, that they can kind of recreate their old voices and speak in that sort of way, which is a cool concept. I like that. However, there's also a lot of dark sides with AI. AI generated content, such as like, scripts and art, don't really create anything. They just kind of cannibalize different pieces from work that was created by an actual real human being. The legality of that is super messy. And there's a lot of lawsuits going on about that right now. I mean, heck, we just had two strikes going on about this very same subject. During the writer's strike, the writers wanted fair pay and also not to have AI given priority over their written scripts. And during the actor strike, studios were apparently considering replacing extras in the back of shots with like AI generated freaky weird computer things. And like clearly that wasn't going to look good anyway. So I don't know what they were trying to get out of that. But I'm glad both of the strikes have ended and that seemingly people are happy. AI has a lot of uses in like the medical field and with like actually helping people. But if you ask me, I don't think it should be used to create art. I think that should be something solely humans do. And that's basically my entire video. We talked a little bit about the early days of pop culture and the history with Shakespeare and Mary Shelley and the radio and how TV kind of blew everything up. And then we talked about, influences it has on society through fashion, through food, through science, through politics. There's a lot of good that it's done for us. And yes, some people don't want to be influenced by it. But if you ask me, and this is maybe not like the most hopeful perspective to have on this sort of thing, I think it's kind of everywhere already. And at this point in time, to claim to not be influenced by pop culture at all, that's just ignorant. So, I think we should appreciate our influences and see what comes next after this. I'm pretty excited to see what the next big thing is. Thanks for watching.